Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session. We'll get started to this session 24 on successful research and research training partnerships. My name's Nigel Spence. I'm associated with the Institute of Global Development at the University of New South Wales, and I'm also a member of the conference committee. So I'll be chairing today. And we've got 3 papers, all really interesting, I'm sure, and all addressing this. One of the conference themes around collaborations and partnerships. Collaborations and partnerships is one of the pathways to navigate through disruption. So I've got the three papers. I'll introduce each in turn, and then we'll try and make sure there's time for questions after each paper. And if we're all really good timekeepers, there should be a little bit of time as well at the end for any discussion and questions across all the papers. But we'll have the 3 papers, each up to 15 minutes presentation, and then each followed by questions. You can put any questions you've got in the Q&A panel or the chat panel, I believe, or there should be time just to raise them spontaneously after the presentations. So if you're not speaking, please go on mute. And it's my pleasure to first introduce Tamara, Megaw and Keren Winterford from the Institute of Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology. Tamara has more than 10 years experience in international development. She's worked on social development and bilateral aid projects of the South Asia and Pacific region, been as a research consultant at UTS since 2017, and her interests include effectiveness of international development programming, gender and sexual diversity, social inclusion, community economies, climate change, adaptation, and environmental justice. And Keren Winterford has more than 20 years experience in the national development sector, many capacities with managing contractors, NGOs, as a private consultant, and more recently in development research. She currently provides research and consultancy services for lots of government and non-government agencies in the development sector. And her areas of expertise include research design and partnership, particularly with NGOs, participatory research, facilitation and training, design, monitoring and evaluation, and strengths-based approaches. So I'm going to hand over to you, but just can I just please remind everybody to go on mute if you're not speaking, which is now going to be everybody except Tamara and Keren. So looking forward to your presentation. Tamara, Megan, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Nigel, for that introduction. It's my pleasure to join you from the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation in Sydney, and to meet with you today and share about research and partnership to promote learning and empowerment of women refugees. So in our presentation, we're going to introduce what the research project was about. The second point is around the community-based protection for refugees, a conceptual understanding of gender equality, the research approach and publications from research, and our partnership approach to research design and implementation. We'll also share about the benefits of the partnership approach and have some time at the end for discussion. So this project was applied research with the I'm Prepared Equality of Refugee Women in the Return and Reintegration Context Program, which is funded.
Sorry, Tamara. Sorry. Apparently it's on presentation view. If you could just change the view.
Sorry about that.
We've got presentation view at the moment.
Thanks. Just one moment and I'll get it on the right view.
Great, thanks. Thanks for anyone that put that comment in the chat. It was really helpful, thanks.
How's that now?
Perfect, thanks.
Great. So I'm going to look over here. So this is funded by DFAT's Gender Action Platform, with the program goal that refugee women are empowered through a return and reintegration process that enables full enjoyment of social, economic and political rights. So it was a partnership from Act for Peace, which is the aid agency of the National Council of Churches in Australia, and the Organisation for Ilangai Ilam Refugee Rehabilitation, also in Sri Lanka and India, and the Border Consortium in Thailand and Myanmar, together with the Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS. So the context of this program was that between 2017 and 2021, the I'm Prepared program worked with Tamil refugee families in camps in Tamil Nadu and local communities in reintegration and post-conflict contexts of northeast Sri Lanka. It also worked with Keren refugee families in North Thailand and local communities in areas of return in Kaya State, Myanmar. Now, unlike the expectation at the start of the project, the political situation in Kaya State in Myanmar continued to worsen. It was quite volatile, and most refugees chose to stay in camps rather than returning over that 3 to 4 year period. So why this community-based protection for refugees approach? The I'm Prepared program pioneered a refugee-led approach in the context of return and reintegration, using protection methods to strengthen women's resilience and gender equality. So community-based protection can strengthen the ability of refugees, particularly women, to anticipate, prepare for, and manage the risks, challenges, and opportunities often associated with voluntary repatriation. Community-based protection is valuable because ultimately reintegration is more sustainable through greater self-reliance and resilience, and by reducing the pressure on family, community, and the government services when they return. Within the refugee return and reintegration praxis, refugee-led preparedness is rarely a priority, and there is often little focus on gender equality and women's empowerment. So this was a program that incorporated gender together with community-based protection. In our research, we measured indicators of women's protection and empowerment through exploring what is safety, justice, and dignity for refugee and returnee women. The Women's Empowerment Program Coordinator from OFFA shared about the benefit of the community-based protection approach. She said, "The program gave us specific objectives. Our empowerment training focused more on decision-making, and through the livelihood training, women were able to gain confidence. With coronavirus, everything changed and there was a lot of uncertainty. Women offered a lot of assistance to each other and took care of emotional needs. People in the camps were able to deal with this situation in a much better way than before. They say, one day we will return, this too shall pass." And that's the kind of attitude that was brought about through this initiative. That was community-based protection over the 3-year program. I'll pass to you, Keren, to share about the conceptual understanding.
Great, thanks Tamara, and hi everyone, nice to virtually be with you today. We just want to share with you the conceptual understanding of the gender equality that we used in this research project, and as we'll demonstrate later, the value of using this framework for the research partnership. So we used the MOSA analytical framework to help identify changes in gender equality for the women refugees. Some of you might be familiar with this, others not. I'll just give a brief overview. It has 3 components. The first one looks at gender roles and division of labour, and it considers different types of work that men and women do in terms of reproductive, productive, community management, but also community politics or sort of community leadership. The second area is control of resources and decision making in the household. So who has access to to resources, who manages those resources, who controls, and how money is spent in the household is another important element of control and decision-making of resources. And the third one is thinking about practical and strategic needs. So it's really important for women refugees to have their practical needs met, which ensures their living conditions are well, they have access to health, education, etc. But importantly, strategic needs as well. And strategic needs are understood as transforming existing inequalities in roles and decision making and achieving those rights in terms of responsibilities and opportunities. Thanks. Next slide, please. Our research approach was quite innovative, I think, in terms of the NGO sector. It was a longitudinal design. We were comparing a baseline of women, particularly women participants, from 2018 and then in 2019 and 20. So we followed this cohort of women and a man in the same household over those 3 years. Interestingly, in the first year, it was a baseline. In the second and third year, we sought to explore the contribution of project activities. So we got a real sense of the experience of refugee women and returnee women as well, about their experience in certain activities. So gender training, livelihood training, and protection training in particular. And we looked at the different types of activities that were done by the partners in those different country locations that Tamara mentioned before. Our interviews of women and men were in the same households to compare the gendered experience. And so it was approximately 50 household pairs. So that's a female who was a primary participant of the project, as well as a male household in that connected to that female, and 50 household pairs in India. And then in relation to the kind of the return aspect of the program, we also interviewed 12 households who returned to Sri Lanka within the project period. Next slide. And so these are our research publications. So we have, as I said before, it was a longitudinal study. So we had 3 annual research reports that were prepared through this partnership approach, and Tamara will share a little bit more about that in the next area, and as well as a policy brief that that aims to influence the sector more broadly. As Tamara mentioned, community-based protection for refugees, it's quite an innovative practice. Thank you. Oh, it's me again. Yep.
Yeah.
So this is another aspect of our research design. So it wasn't Tamara going to share this, it was me. We had a very strong collaborative practice. Unfortunately, this last year, the third and final year, we weren't able to visit the country locations, but in years 1 and 2, both Tamara and I went to Thailand and also India to support the partners in the research activities. So these activities included training of local refugees. So these refugee organisations, refugee-led organisations that were part of this project, we trained them in research skills and gender analysis. There was piloting done of data collection tools in the local context, and this was really important to ensure that the tools were relevant to the local context, and we could make sure that there was do no harm principles were achieved. Refugees were trained as researchers, and they carried out their interviews with refugees in their own communities. And so that was really important as well, to create rapport, connection, and make sure that the refugees that were interviewed for the research were at ease through the whole process. And then another important aspect for us as well was research partners involved in the sense making. So this was done both in country, but also online as well over the course of the annual data collection cycles as we started to analyse the data.
And last one for you, Keren.
Great, thank you. So the partnership approach contributed to quality and rigour of program learning. So we're sort of into our last segment of the presentation in terms of the benefits of the partnership approach. So partnership approach contributed to quality and rigour of the program learning. So we did have the same cohort through the 3 years, and that enabled us to create rapport and understanding of those local areas. There was a rich picture of women and men refugees' perspectives and lived experiences was enabled, and we had both qualitative and quantitative measures within an interview guide. The learning from refugee women about the value of the program activities affirmed the work that partners were doing. So that focus on the women's experience in those activities, we learned about the value of those, and that really supported the partners to do their work further. The unprepared research extended the gender programming approach of partners. And so the quote here demonstrates this. From ISF, we got a new way of looking at gender through the MOSA framework, and it added a more systematic way that allowed us to give a greater depth to dialogue on gender with refugee communities and our partners. It was particularly helpful, and we will be extending the other 7 camps where we work. So whilst the partners were working in doing a lot of work around gender and described their program work in the past as gender programming, the MOSA framework really consolidated their understanding of their contribution to gender equality.
Thanks. So there was a mix of learning approaches. There was the monitoring and evaluation by the partners. There was also this research that we've described, and one element of it was the real-time feedback about the program implementation that the refugee-led organisations had. And there was also online learning sessions. So I'll share more about that. So this partnership approach promoted inclusion of diverse knowledges and voices. So learning was shared across the different working contexts between the partners, those in the Thai-Myanmar context and those in the India-Sri Lanka context. And they talked together about women's empowerment approaches of community-based protection. And sometimes there were similarities in their approaches, and sometimes they needed to be different because of those different political and cultural factors. For example, there were online learning sessions throughout the 3 years of the program where partners discussed key topics, and some of them were livelihoods, some of them were reintegration, and there was great benefit from everyone hearing the different approaches and lessons learned. The partnership approach also amplified the narratives and the experiences of refugee women who would not otherwise have a voice in international forums. So the research documented learnings that were then used in advocacy forums. Our partnership approach contributed to the improved programming practice and influence in the sector. So through the involvement of the refugee-led organisations in research, the program partners could share the learning with a wider audience. And here is a photo of the midterm learning event that the I'm Prepared partners had in 2019. This was held in Bangkok with representatives of all the partners, and it was both an opportunity for the partners to learn from each other, and they visited this camp here in Mai Hong Son, but also there was advocacy messages shared with donors and the refugee protection sector in Asia, so a range of different stakeholders. As Keren also showed before, there was a policy brief that was co-written by the program partners at the conclusion of the project. And there's also another outcome of influence in the sector where the I'm Prepared program was shared as a best practice on the UNHCR Global Compact of Refugees platform. So that's some of our thoughts about the benefits of partnership in research. And we've got a good 5 minutes for questions. So I'd really encourage you, if you'd like to put something in the chat box about your impression from the presentation. Maybe it sparked an idea from your own experience in partnership or working with researchers, or maybe a question to us, and we'd be happy to answer that. And also after the conference, if you'd like to get in touch, these are our contact details. And we've got a new exciting website where you can access the publications from the research.
Thanks so much, Tamara.
Thanks very much for listening.
Yeah, thanks, Tamara. Thanks, Keren. That's terrific. And you've given us the links and there's those various products from the research we can look at there. There are a few questions here. We in fact don't have a lot of time because we need to start the next paper real soon. But I just wonder whether you might address one of them, trying to merge a couple of these questions about how did you kind of select groups, or how were groups selected for the project, and are there particular target groups or issues that you're trying to inform, provide an evidence base, or even does this link to an SDG perhaps is another question. So I think the question, I'm trying to splice a few together here. I mean, how do you identify or select partners? Are there particular target groups that you're aiming to work with, or are there particular target groups that you're trying to inform through the research?
Well, yeah, we do have a strategic partnership approach. I'll hand over to Keren, who leads that in this development effectiveness area.
Sure. The research was very much around sort of research and evaluation. So our primary audience for the research was the partnership itself and those implementing partners. So the idea of the annual cycle of research was to inform back into the program planning and program delivery. So that was our primary audience. In terms of there was a question there about how do we select the research sort of those that we trained for the research. Yeah. And yeah, we focused on our research partners and those implementing partners and upskilling them in research activities. So that was really important for us to have the partners benefit from the research training and the research skills. In terms of SDGs, yeah, I think there's 17 SDGs, and I think many people can identify lots of areas where with this project and our research partnership connected to this project achieves those SDGs. Number one is the focus on gender equality.
Thanks, Keren, and thanks, Tamara. But there are other questions there. Maybe you'd like us to keep looking at those, but we'll need to move on. And if there's time, maybe we can circle back to some of those. And
sure, we can type into that box.
Yeah. Okay. Terrific. Thanks very much. But let's please go to our next paper from Kathryn and Sonnthida and Sara, which is Partnerships in a Pandemic, a case study of the ACIAR Capacity Building Programs, the Australian College. I always get this wrong. The Australian Centre for International Agriculture Research, and Kathryn is the fellowships coordinator and research assistant in that program, in the capacity building program at ACIAR. Sonnthida, you're the deputy head of agricultural engineering division at the Cambodian Agricultural Research and Development Institute, and Sara, you're director of Duniya Consulting, and done a lot of consulting around the region with many different organisations and projects. So really looking forward to your presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Nigel. So I thought I'd do a bit of a background to start us off on what ACIAR is and what we do, and then we'll kick off into the content. So as Nigel said, we're the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. So we commission research in 36 different countries, and we partner with over 150 institutions. And as part of that, to complement this research, we run a capacity building program. So that all works with both individual researchers and the organisations and institutions across all the overseas programs that we run. So we aim to upskill, provide professional development and increase connections with Australia as well. And we work using a flexible approach with our in-country partners in order to ensure that our programs actually suit the needs of both the countries and the strategic direction. So we have country offices and regional offices, which help us with that. And then, of course, we connect individually with the organisations and their fellows themselves as well, which TIDA is one of. So our largest program is the John Allwright Fellowship Program. That's kind of a part of the broader Australia Awards program. So through that fellowship, we support researchers to undertake a master's or PhD program at an Australian university. And I'm sure you can imagine the risks during the COVID-19 pandemic for this program were extremely high. So many awardees weren't able to commence in 2020, in 2021, and we still have a few awardees from 2019 who have also been deferred. In addition to that, we have people in country who are unable to conduct field work, and we've had to postpone the entire program due to travel restrictions. So it has been really, really significant. We have adapted and we've kind of put in lots of different support mechanisms and supported people who are currently doing their research in Australia, but it's definitely been tricky. So I'm going to hand over to Sara, who recently conducted a tracer study of the program, and she'll be able to provide a little bit more detail and context on why the program is so core to our initiatives and the ongoing risks associated too.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Good morning, everyone. I'm speaking to you from Wurundjeri country in Melbourne, Australia. And I'll try and do not take up too much time, but tell you about this tracer study that ACIAR commissioned of its alumni from the John Allwright Fellowship Program, the JAF program. And this tracer study was part of a much sort of more significant upgrade to evaluation and performance monitoring of ACIAR's capacity building program that started in 2019. The aim of the tracer study was to look at outcomes primarily for the individual scholars, the alumni, but also to look for examples or pointers to contributions and changes within the organisations where alumni are working. The tracer study had a sequential design. We did a population-based survey of all of the alumni who had completed their JAF within a 10-year period of 2010 to 2019. And then we did some qualitative case studies of individual alumni. And Dr. Sambath, who's here, was one of the alumni who was generously willing to be part of those case studies. And we'll hear from her in a few minutes. ACIAR and Duniya Consulting also collaborated with Wallace Group, which is a specialist survey organisation that also works on Australia Awards tracer studies. So they conducted the survey component, which we designed, and achieved a really fabulous response rate. Actually, we had around 75% of alumni in that population who responded, and 31% of those alumni were women. So that's the survey data that we had. The survey started in April last year and went over that sort of April-May period. So it was pretty early in the pandemic, and there was still a lot of unknowns about how, of course, that was going to unfold. Well, there still are. The case studies were done much later. So we did, I did most of the case study interviews in September, December. So the pandemic and the implications of that were clearly more prolonged and more serious. And so what we saw in the case studies was able to look a bit more at the COVID implications. I'm not going to go through all of the tracer study findings in just because of time. And it's coming out, the whole report will be out for publication within a few weeks, we hope, from ACIAR. But just some highlights. JAF scholars are dedicated students with really high completion rates, even at the PhD level. So Overall 92.6% completion. It was a little bit higher for the women. And some of the data we looked at by comparison found that actually for Australian students in Australia across the board, it was more like 80%. So really high completion rates for higher degree research study. Also, JAF alumni generally had really high rates of retention in their organisations. So they are using those skills and knowledge and networks that they developed during their studies in Australia within their organisations, more than 70%. And even more broadly, when we did the survey, 85% of alumni are still active researchers. So that's really valuable, valuable to see. Alumni told us about many professional and personal benefits that they attributed to their JAF experiences, promotions, personal confidence, changes in their attitudes, greater comfort working in international teams. There's a whole range of things I can't mention. But relevant to what we're going to talk about a bit more today is that 78.6% of alumni still have active links with their university in Australia. 71% are still connected to other students and colleagues that they met while they were here. And alumni spoke about how important it was for them to be able to have access to the equipment and the labs and the libraries and the other resources that they were able to make use of during their studies in Australia. The case studies we did also pointed to the importance of the sort of pre-existing deep engagement that ACIAR staff and ACIAR project research teams had, and the role that that played in supporting the identification of candidates for these scholarships and for supporting scholars during their studies and afterwards. So there's a very close and important role for ACIAR staff and researchers more generally, which we think really contributed to the really high success rates there. But this leads us to what the case studies sort of told us about some of the challenges arising from the COVID pandemic, and particularly the constraints that places on what that tells us about the constraints from not being able to be in Australia, as Kathy said, and also conversely, we also know that international researchers have had and Australian scientists have had their travel constrained as well. So what we're seeing, therefore, is that the risk that for scholars, if they have less time in Australia, that means less time and opportunity for the sorts of things that they spoke about, because a key aim of the JAF program is to catalyse and strengthen links with Australia and Australians. The Tracer study shows that's really successful, particularly in linking with Australian universities and researchers there, and also with forming the international networks with peers. So, if students are not able to be in Australia, it's going to be really hard to achieve some of those really strong outcomes. One of the top 5 things that JAF scholars valued was being able, as I mentioned, to use top quality labs and equipment. And also they spoke about the really personal changes arising from the chance to be living and working in Australia. So losing or having constraints on those opportunities may well have real implications for the capacity building outcomes for the ACIAR programs. That said, the case studies did also show us some opportunities arising from the restrictions that came from the pandemic around the world. So, for example, a researcher in Mozambique spoke about the opportunities for the agriculture sector in Mozambique arising from border closures. And he spoke about how imports from South Africa were really significantly constrained, which created great opportunities for Mozambican agriculture production that he was really hopeful would be able to be really grabbed and built upon in the longer term. Another scientist in Laos spoke about the fact that his Australian collaborators couldn't travel to Laos. So he was taking on increased roles and increased leadership of the research projects, which was a great opportunity when international scientists weren't traveling. So clearly the pandemic has brought opportunities, but also huge challenges, as Kathy mentioned, and ACIAR's made a number of quite specific changes and adaptations in the capacity building program. I'm going to hand back to Kathy to briefly talk about those before we hear from Tida.
Thank you, Sarah. So I think it's become quite aware that increasingly our capacity building programs have quite heavily relied on that face-to-face models, face-to-face training and engagement, which naturally in the current climate has been nearly impossible with everyone except our fellows who were already in Australia when the pandemic started. So we really were keen to not lose that deep engagement with people. It's incredibly important to our ability to do our work, both currently and of course looking towards the future when it comes to being part of our research projects as well. So we acted really quite quickly, and I think we put together 2 programs within about 6 weeks. So in April 2020, we launched 2 different programs, and we worked really, really closely with our alumni and our country officers to kind of see how we could make sure that this work continued in a way that was going to actually be beneficial to people and not just overwhelm and cause a little bit more stress and just say, you need to be online constantly and in these professional development courses. So we were kind of really, really keen to make sure we had that balance. So for 2 of our fellowship programs, we decided that they were going to go online completely until face-to-face was possible again, which was significant challenges. We have an internship portion for most of our fellowships as well, which means that people would go to an institute in Australia or overseas and spend a period of about 3 months doing some shadow work and professional development and lots of peer-to-peer engagement. So instead of doing that, we launched a program to support everybody who was already in Australia. We decided that we could see the stress that was coming across our HDR students and the real difficulties in being away from home during a global pandemic and a crisis. So we launched a program that was a pastoral care, and we have online meetings every few months, one-to-one phone calls, and we also set up a peer-to-peer engagement and support system. So everyone had what we call a buddy to talk to if they weren't comfortable talking to ACR staff. And then for those who are deferred, they joined our alumni prematurely and became part of that network, and they were open to all the opportunities that came through that. So whether that's a training program or some countries who have been continuing face-to-face engagement, they were able to do events and things like that. So it's like you haven't just been awarded a fellowship and then left until you can come to Australia. That engagement continued, which we've had some quite positive feedback, and also meant that they had a mentor within alumni already. So when they come to Australia, I feel like they have a little bit of an extra benefit there too. And one of the most exciting responses that we had was the launch of this alumni research support facility. So this was specifically aimed at supporting short-term research projects that was directly related to the pandemic and building upon regions' capacity in order to respond to it. So this was a significant change and opportunity to engage with our alumni, where our alumni actually led the research programs. And it's been incredibly rewarding to learn and to read all of the reports and to continue the engagement in that way. And I really think that it's become a more progressive way. Lots of people had been pushing for this sort of engagement before, and the pandemic really kind of pushed us over the edge and put the leadership in the hands of our alumni. And one of those alumni is the incredible Tida. So I will hand over to her now.
Thank Kathy and Sara giving insight about the program. So today, my name is Tida. I actually speaking from Phnom Penh, Cambodia, from my home at the moment, actually. So I'm going to give you a bit of insight how I actually experienced from being about to grant to experience all of the capacity building that are provided by ACIAR. So you are going to hear 2 things today. One is experience being a chef, John Alright Fellow, And also another one is actually the experience of Mary William Fellow and the impact of the COVID-19 on this particular fellowship. So just give you a little bit of background. So I am a researcher doing post-harvest, graduated, and then I visited the countryside, and then I got this opportunity to go to Australia to do my PhD in food science. So come from Cambodia, go into Australia is a huge change. So I experienced a lot of this from that particular program. I am being able to actually graduated with a PhD, increase my professional career, being the first girl that have PhD in my office. So I work for CARDI, Cambodian Agricultural Research and Development Institute. And then from that, I actually being promoted to be a deputy head of agricultural engineering. And I also get a lot of confidence in terms of presenting myself as a professional way, in the sense that people can actually trust, believe, and confident the way I talk, the way I actually using those knowledge from chef to communicate in my career. So apart from that, as a personal experiences, I actually learn a lot. I always tell people that I am a double-headed person. It means that I actually understand the perspective of being Asian, but also took experience from Australia and then combine it. So I understand the culture of being in Australia and then try to combine in Cambodia and then use it for advantage in terms of networking, in terms of communicate in my research, not just research, but also adapting those research into commercialization, extension. And I also become very confident. I become a person that being able to actually travel by myself. I travel a lot. I think one of the things I told people that I actually drive in Australia by myself for 5,000 kilometers in the outback of Australia. Something that, being to go and study in Australia gave me a confidence as a independent person, someone that grown up in a culture that the woman being care, being restricted. But from chef, as I mentioned, it's actually helped me to my career, to make me confident technically, but also help me in terms of management myself, time management and everything. And on top of that, I also get experience for my personal life. So it's always something I tell people that it's not just the paper that I got PhD, but I also increase my personal life. Moving to another experience is being a Mary William Fellow. So Mary William Fellow was designed to have a woman in agriculture to enhance their leadership in the workplace. So so I'm one of the person in Cambodia, 4 persons in Cambodia being able to grant that particular award, Mary William Fellow. And then we went to Australia early in 2020, just before the pandemic. Everything was designed to, it's a 1-year program designed to help us in terms of improve our career, being a leadership. Anything that we wanted to do, we want to actually say it into the coordinator that we want to improve this particular thing. So for me, I wanted to improve international development. So a part of that fellowship, I went to Australia to do all the leadership course for 2 weeks, and then we're planning to do professional placement, which is about 8 weeks. So we plan and everything is there, and then all of a sudden, the pandemic hit us, and we was not sure that what is going on. So everyone sort of like feel really bad, really, negative in the sense. So we sort of like wrote an ACIAR sort of like come up to tell us that we're willing to help you. We want to make sure that you are in the program. So we always got the support from the facilitator as well as from ACIAR. So
Peter, and we need to wrap up really soon, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just gonna finish it in voice. So from that moment, I took the time and then I started to think what is the opportunity apart from the negative impact of the pandemic. So I applied for the small research program as Kathy research, which is ARSS. So I got that fund to implement about impact of COVID on price market. But on top of that, I also being able to sit and write the proposal for publication. So we publish menu books from Asia. On another thing, I actually being able to collaborate with a lot of research in my special area. So take home message, something happened negatively, just don't think that it is a negative. It's always something better after the bad way, after the storm. So I think that's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that great account of your journey through this disruption. That's been really instructive for us. Sara and Kathryn, we're out of time. Was there anything more? No, can we move on? That was really terrific. We don't have time for questions, but I wonder if it's any of this experience is written up at all, whether that could be shared for us to get more information. Otherwise, we can contact you directly, I assume. But we need to go to our final paper, and because we've got a hard stop at midday, and the final paper from Rachel Farquhar and Annie Dorey is on Strive PNG, a case study in using a partnership-based approach in implementation research to strengthen surveillance and health systems in PNG. Really interesting bios for both of these speakers. I encourage you to take a full look at the information on the conference website, but without taking more time, I'll hand over to Rachel and Annie.
Thank you, Nigel. I'll just wait for the presentation to come up. Great, yep, thanks. So thanks everyone. So the focus of this presentation. Yep, sorry, Rachel, it does.
No worries.
So thanks again, everyone. So the focus of this presentation is on using a partnership-based approach in implementation research to strengthen surveillance and health systems in PNG. Next. Sorry, Rachel, next slide.
Sorry, I've put it on the next one. Has it come through?
Okay, it has now. So this is the outline of the presentation. My name's Annie Dorey and I provide in-country support to the Strive PNG project. And for this presentation, I will give a brief overview of Strive PNG and also introduce the partnership approach that Strive utilizes. My colleague Rachel will focus on the second part of the presentation, and she will focus more on the development of the partnership agreement. Next slide. So Strive PNG has 4 end of program outcomes, and they include strengthened sentinel surveillance for rapid identification of vector-borne disease outbreaks, resurgent, resistant, or emerging pathogens, and vectors, as well as use of data for decision making. 2, expand capacity for genomic, serological, and vector surveillance. 3, policy options to provide key health system support to address barriers to effective surveillance, better support to frontline health workers. And lastly, effective partnerships to release meaningful and sustained change. It's important to note that the same rigor and emphasis that is applied to the technical end of program outcomes are the same applied to the partnership component of the project. Next slide. So what do we mean by partnerships? Different settings have different definitions of partnerships. Strive's definition of partnership is derived from this partnering continuum, which is taken from the Partnership Brokers Association. And as reflected on this slide, there are two extremes. You have the transactional relationship, where large of the focus is on the funding relationship, and often under this extreme, funders dictate how project activities look like, versus partnership, where the focus is more centered around co-created activities, and so all partners have mutual accountability. This is not to say that partnerships are better than transactional relationship, but it kind of highlights the different perspective of how partnership could potentially look like. So Strive PNG has 3 partnership brokers, 2 internal brokers, which includes Rachel and myself, and an external broker, Sara McKenna. And so the role of the partnership broker is to help facilitate the move of partners who are sitting in the transactional extreme of the continuum into the partnership extreme of the continuum. And this is particularly important when the project or program is focused on systemic change. I guess to give an analogy, the role of the role of the partnership broker. Imagine you have a garden and you want the best produce coming out from your garden. And so in order to obtain that, you have a gardener in place whose main role is to maintain and look after the garden so you get the kind of produce that you want. And so the role of the gardener is similar to the role of a partnership broker, where he or she is in charge of maintaining the relationship within the project. And often you get a good outcome of it when you are able to look after the relationship under the project. So this is the partnering cycle, and the partnering cycle is the process used when utilizing this partnership approach. As reflected on the slide, there are 4 stages, starting with scoping and building, managing and maintaining, reviewing and revising, and sustaining outcomes. When utilizing the partnership approach, you can be in 3 different stages at the same time. So for example, currently under Strive PNG, we are in the process of reviewing and revising and also managing and maintaining various aspects of the project, whilst at the same time doing a bit of scoping and building. Thanks, next slide. So working in a large consortium like Strive PNG, where you have different organizations and institutions coming together, they bring different working cultures and different objectives and aims on what they want to achieve. And so in order to enable these partners to work together, we had to find a common denominator. And so that's how the Strive PNG guiding principles came about. And so as highlighted in bold in this slide, the words highlighted in bold, these are the Strive PNG guiding principles, and they provide a kind of guidance for how the project operates. So starting with building common purpose along a shared journey, promoting mutual benefit through acknowledging vulnerability as well as strengths, promoting equity and voice across and within partners, promoting ownership and sustainability within PNG institutions, harnessing diversity across partners, promoting transparency, fostering equity, and lastly, flexibility and adaptiveness. Sometimes we get asked, how does this guiding principle reflect in behavior? And I guess I'll make reference to the last guiding principle, which is flexibility and adaptiveness. When partners initially came together, they recognized that there'd be potential challenges before the project. So a classic example, COVID. And so in recognizing the challenges, there was a space provided for flexibility and adaptiveness, so that when the project faced the challenge, we were able to adapt into another mode, but still maintain the goals of the project. So that's how flexibility and adaptiveness translates to behavior. So, sorry, Rach, next slide. So 2 important questions come about. Why did partners want to partner in this project, and how did we go about with it? So it started with when initially mapping who would be potential partners to Strive PNG. We recognized that different partners brought different skill sets, experience, data setting, cultural influence, and everything they brought helped the project. And so enabling partners to recognize that what they were bringing into the project was important was the key that made them want to be part of the project. And so a classic example would, one of our main partners in the project is the National Department of Health here in PNG, and particularly the National Malaria Program. And they bring with them a vast experience of working in the malaria space, particularly in PNG context. And that in itself was valuable to the project because it provided the guidance on how Strive would operate in PNG with regards to malaria. And how did we go about with all this? It started off with workshopping the idea on how Strive would look like, and that started in early 2019 in Madang, and then that led to one-on-one discussions with various partners, exchange of calls and emails, and once all partners were on the same page, it led to the next stage of the project. With that, thank you. I'll hand over to my colleague, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Annie. And so, as Annie mentioned, all of those key points work towards the development of the Strive Partnership Agreement, which then describes the working relationship that investigators, directors and organisations hope to develop over the project's duration, but also more importantly, beyond the end of the project. And so this agreement is based on the 10 key attributes for effective partnering, which are developed from the Partnership Brokers Association. And so just really quickly, the Strive Partnership brings together 13 research and implementation organisations from across Papua New Guinea and Australia. And so the first part of developing the partnership agreement was working with partners to identify the drivers for being involved from an organisational level. And so as one of our program directors indicated, we work together to maintain the working relationship. Everyone has ambitions and motives, and there is no hidden agenda. Where there are limitations, we know about it, and where there isn't, we also know there really is a genuine partnership. However, getting to this point, it was really important for partners to all sit down and identify why they wanted to be involved in the partnership, discuss any misalignments up front, and hopefully address perceptions of hidden agendas. And so these foundational discussions provided partners with a good springboard for future activities. And it also enabled partners to understand why each other one was at the table, but also more important. And so the next part of the partnership agreement was the co-creation of the governance structure. And this identifies the different decision-making bodies of the partnership where individuals contribute and how the project will operate. And so it's really important to acknowledge that the governance structure was agreed to be flexible from the offset. And so as the project grows and new opportunities emerge, and challenges arise, such as COVID, the governance structure is adaptable and will change to fit what's best for the project. And so a key rationale for adopting a partnership-based approach is that it allows collaborative groups to mobilise both financial as well as in-kind resources, with hopefully the best leveraging both. And so partners often unconsciously identify the value of the financial contributions and sometimes fail to articulate the role of in-kind contributions. And so for Strive, it was really important that partners articulate their strengths and needs in the context of the partnership and share this with the broader consortium. And so, for example, if you look at the diagram there, you can see there are different types of resources for partners that they can then bring to the table. And so for the Papua New Guinea Institute of Medical Research, as one of the lead implementing partners, they bring to the table technical resource capacity, laboratory infrastructure, and decades of invaluable relationships at the community, provincial, and then national level. Whereas Burnett, for example, brings with it technical expertise and advisory capacity, and also support with the contractual management and donor requirements. And so as one of our program directors indicated, we need to identify, everyone needs to be fully aware that how this project will operate. We all need to share resources. And so the next part of the partnership agreement was discussing risks, and the Strive partnership brings with it both shared risks, which are experienced equally across all partners, as well as individual risks from the organisation. Dispersed risks across power imbalances in between organisations, and this was a really key component of co-developing the partnership agreement. And so it meant that partners had to embrace some of the vulnerabilities and allow partners to jointly construct ways of mitigating against these together. And so, for example, STRIVE partners agreed that on one lens, if we don't find ways to ensure partners are meaningfully engaged in the work, the strength, depth and breadth of expertise within our existing partnership will be lost as we lose collaborators who feel disconnected to the work. Whereas also there was an acknowledgement that the drain on resources through an increased commitment of time and energy in partnership building and project development was a key risk to the project as well. So at times, partners are reluctant to share some of the individual risks or organisational risks and the challenges that they bring with it. However, we found as partners opened up about some of their concerns, it then allowed them to jointly construct ways to mitigate against these challenges and strengthen the understanding and relationships between partner organisations. And so, as you'll see in the below diagram as well, for Burnett, one of the risks was that they had several pre-existing strong working relationships with different PNG organisations, and that if the STRIVE partnership wasn't successful, it could possibly adversely affect some of these projects that were operating in the country. Whereas for the Papua New Guinea Institute of Medical Research, one of the risks was that they would lose the trust of other Papua New Guinea partners who it specifically brought into the partnership if international collaborators do not abide by the partnership behaviours that have been agreed upon upfront. And so where are we now? We've got a co-developed partnership agreement, which has been signed by all the STRIVE PNG partners with institutional endorsement from 13 organisations. We're, like everyone else, navigating the challenges of COVID-19 remote partnership health checks, which hopefully continues to embed a collaborative mindset and assess the efficiency and effectiveness of the partnership. And so just a really quick story of one of the successes of the STRIVE partnership. And this started with a shared vision of collaboration, and it's the molecular hub. And this is a key kind of part of the project, which is aiming to strengthen molecular surveillance and diagnostics capacity by bringing together key technical officers from the University of Papua New Guinea School of Medicine and Health Sciences, PNG IMR, and the Central Public Health Laboratory. And this has research officers from across these different organisations sharing workforce, consumables, reagents, communication support, and so on. And so you can see in the pictures above our amazing researchers. And so this partnership way of working was shown to be of extremely high value, particularly last year when the Molecular Hub team needed to rapidly establish COVID-19 ACIAR and provide technical assistance and leadership to PNG IMR's COVID-19 testing role for the country program directors. So COVID-19 is a really good example of partnerships. It highlighted all the strength we had. Imagine if we didn't have the Molecular Hub in place. Now that there is involvement from STRIVE and the Trilateral Malaria Project, the institution's workforce is all coming together. The team was prepared unexpectedly for COVID-19. And so just a huge acknowledgement to all of the STRIVE partners who are a part of the project and continue to provide support on a daily basis. And I know we're probably out of time, so we're happy to accept any questions offline as well.
Right, thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Annie. That was terrific. And what a successful partnership too. What a great example. And so it strikes me how complicated with so many partners, like 12 or 13 partners. Is that right? That's a lot to bring together and to get those kinds of outcomes. I thought we were going to be stopped dead in our tracks at 12, but it appears that's not the case. So maybe there is time for one or two final questions if anybody would like to raise them with any of our speakers today. Or if any of our panelists, any of our speakers want to add final comment or question each other, that would be great as well. Otherwise, I think we're all good, and that's been incredibly interesting. And thanks to the comments in the chat, which have given us links to follow up for further information, and we've got contact details for each other, so we can follow up that way as well. So thanks so much. Thanks to Annie, Rachel, Sonnthida, Kathryn, Sara, Keren, Tamara. Really great presentations, and we'll close the session here and wish you a happy rest of the day and rest of this conference. Bye for now.